Hello all, we will be discussing lines and graphs and how to plot lines on graphs today. Now we need to define our terms. I won't define line yet, but I will define graph. In this context, when we use the word graph, we mean the Cartesian two-coordinate system, which measures two dimensions of a function or a line or a graph. Bunch of fancy words, we'll cover them soon. But let's start with two dimensions. Look at the ground. Roll a marble. Imagine you're rolling a marble across the ground or rolling a ball. How many dimensions is it rolling? Well, it moves left and right and up and down, so that would be two. Now let's say you take a tennis ball and you throw the tennis ball on the floor and it bounces up and down all across the floor. It would be moving in three dimensions at most because it has an up and down, a left and right, and a forward and backward. But if you have a sheet of paper, which is where you draw a Cartesian 2 graph, then you have two dimensions. You have an x dimension, which measures left and right, and you have a y dimension, which measures up and down. So if you also have points, which are just locations along the coordinate system. We draw these by drawing periods where that point is located. It will be best if you go through an example. Take out a Cartesian graph or draw one yourself. The way I draw it is I simply draw a crosshairs where the x and the y intersect, the x line and the y line intersect, and I draw hashes or tallies at every unit that I'm measuring. So, and I'll have a picture in the video that I posted that represents the Cartesian graph. But the tallies or the hashes or whatever you want to call them are just symbols to keep track of your distance along the x or the y axis. So let's draw some points. Let's draw the point 0, 0, where you open parentheses, 0, 0, close parentheses is what we need to draw on the graph. Now this notation, the open parentheses, 0, 0, close parentheses, is just a way of summing up information. It is no different than saying in normal English, draw a point where x equals 0 and y equals 0. When x equals 0 and y equals 0, that is called the origin. This is just a word we use. It can be important in future discussions, but it is a relatively arbitrary number, and it just is one you need a term that's useful to remember. So I will draw a period at 0, 0, and let's say I have another point, which is defined at the location along this graph of 1, 1. Well, 1, 1 means you go across to the right 1 along the x-axis, and you go up along the y-axis 1, and you draw a point there. Same with 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, and 5, 5. Now here's the fun part. Let's say you have to draw the point, open parentheses, -1, comma, -1, close parentheses. Well, negative is the opposite of positive by agreement. We agree that that's true in mathematics. So instead of going to the right one along the x-axis, we go to the left one along the y-axis. And since we have a -1 value for y, we also go down 1 for the y. And let's say we have -2, 2 for the same value, we're constructing a line, by the way. 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5. Now, if you drew the hashes accurately, where each hash is relatively the same distance from each other, you have similar units, and you can connect these dots to form a line. And now we have a line. Now, that's one way to make a line, but there's another way to make a line. A line has three properties. It has a y-intercept, it has a slope. It also has other properties, but all the other properties like x-intercept can be derived from those two properties. Can be calculated. Derived is another word for calculated. So, what is the y-intercept of this line? Y-intercept, remember, and this is a good way to remember. Y-intercept is y equals blank when x equals 0. So if you go to a line, when x equals 0, what does y equal? Well, in this case, because of the way I constructed the problem, y does also equal 0. Now, a different line can have y equals 1, or -3, or 5, or pi, or any other number. But in this case, y equals 0 when x equals 0, which is the exact same thing as saying the y-intercept of this line equals 0. And that's the exact same thing as saying we're going to assign a variable called b to the y-intercept. And we're going to say that b in this equation equals 0. Now we have also another property of lines called slope. Slope is an equation that describes how x and y change in relation to each other. It's kind of like saying you have 3-to-1 odds, but a little bit different than that. It's similar, like an analogy, but let's just go through the equation. M equals change in y, change in y divided by change in x. Now here's something we discussed in the first kinematics problem, first kinematics lesson on this channel about physics. Change in y equals y final, which I'm going to abbreviate yf, minus y initial, which I'll abbreviate yi. And change in x equals x final minus x initial. Slope actually takes a little time to calculate because you need to calculate 4 numbers. But there's a trick to it, which I will discuss in the next lesson. But for now, just know that a line has 2 values. The y-intercept, which should be relatively easy to calculate if you're given the right information. It might be more difficult based on the information they give you. And slope, which usually you have to calculate yourself and takes a little bit of time because there's a lot of numbers involved. But let's just give you the final equation for m. M equals y final minus y initial, all divided by x final minus x initial. And another way of saying that is m, or slope. Slope equals rise divided by run. That's the easiest way to remember it. Rise is how far you go up and down. Run is how far you go left and right. And I'm at 9 minutes, so in the next lesson I will discuss m, slope, how to find it. And also, I need to give you the equation for lines. I forgot to do that. Y equals mx plus b. Y and x are numbers you plug in once you find the line. M and b are actual numbers, like 5 or 0. In this case, m is the slope, and in this line, it equals 1. And b is the y-intercept. And I hope you've been taking notes, because I have to consult my notes sometimes too. The y-intercept of the line we constructed with the origin at 0, and it goes up 1 and across 1, draw a point, up 1 and across 1, draw a point, rise 1, run 1, draw another point. The slope is 1, the y-intercept is 0. So the way you write that is y equals 1x plus 0, and when you simplify, you get y equals x. 10 minutes are done. Thank you guys. I will discuss more soon.